So again, my name is Jacob Monzingo, and I'm a PhD candidate as well in second language acquisition and teaching. We're representing today from the University of Arizona. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, a little more about this journey through internationalization that I had, and then trying to arrive at maybe how I can use virtual reality, or how we can use virtual reality to help internationalize students, our curriculums, and if we arrive at the same conclusions, awesome. If not, that's okay too. I'm going to ask a little bit for some forbearance on your part. This may seem scattered. I just accepted a position at the Defense Language Institute. We're moving tomorrow, so yay. Anyway, to get started, so just a quick overview. I'm going to talk a little bit about internationalization, immersion, some study abroad, talk about various VR studies that I've performed. You might recognize some names from some of the studies. And then I'm going to go over some of the best practices and lessons that I learned / we learned. And then I'm going to talk just a smidgen about, is that a real word, smidgen? I'm going to talk a smidgen about virtual reality headsets and like maybe some good directions to go. Internationalization. You'll notice that I thought I was being clever by changing between an S and a Z or a Z, you know, as some people say it. It wasn't really clever. It was just, I was being crazy. So welcome to my psyche. So the first thing was I said, what is internationalization? I saw the call for papers or proposals, and I basically said, is it the same as intercultural competence? Why are we having this big discussion about internationalization at the ICC 2020? And no kidding, the first thing that came up in the University of Arizona library system when I just typed in internationalization was this Voices That Matter conference from 2007. And it was a developer toolkit. And I said, okay, I must be doing the wrong thing. But it turns out I was on the right track. So this was, let's see if I've got the name here. So the person who was presenting at this conference, his name was Shanjan Li, and he was talking about coding strategies that should be used to internationalize the Google Web Toolkit from the ground up. So he was already talking about bottom-up processes and talking about top-down processes, but he wasn't talking about it in higher education. He was coming at it from web development and from the business world, which, incidentally, the next 7 hits on my search for our library were all from the International Journal of Business. And I thought, okay, maybe I'm on the right track, but I'm still really anxious about what this internationalization means. So after figuring out that it's maybe a coding strategy and it's a corporate strategy, I came across this. Thankfully, this was the second one, Internationalization of Higher Education by DeWitt et al. I imagine that seems super familiar for most of you by now. I think DeWitt was in the call for proposals. And then I ran into this other source that was really excellent. And that was Stigger's 2018 Introduction, Internationalization in Higher Education. So they started to really spell it out for me. So these both, the DeWitt et al. Is actually like a research study. If you looked at it, it was this huge thing done by a group of authors authorized by the European Parliament to go and study like 17 different countries' strategies for internationalization. And they all hit some of the same things, which was intercultural competence. Okay, I was relieved, right? And then they started talking about corporate strategies. They were talking about recruitment, study abroad, trying to internationalize the students as students, but also trying to get the university from this perspective that we've got to be competitive. I ran into that word competitive so many times, and I thought, whoa, I thought we're all about cooperation and we want to help each other in higher education. But I kept coming across competitive, and it's just because, nobody wants to be left behind. So they talk about that here, and without reading this really text-heavy, the entire thing here, I wanted to focus on these dimensions and approaches range from the mobility of and competition for students, teachers, and scholars, the export of academic systems and cultures, Research cooperation, okay, good, there's some cooperation in there. It wasn't number one, but it was in there. And then knowledge transfer and capacity building, among a huge list of other things. So again, kind of going through my journey of what even was internationalization and how are we conceptualizing it as the academy, so to speak. Okay, Stigger's synthesis was a little different. It falls under the umbrella term of globalization, which again, you could argue that globalization didn't necessarily have roots in academics, but in a whole other strategy of things, without trying to get too deep into that. But again, looking at the international dimension in the educational system through teaching and research, and then where is it? Where the transfer of ideas as knowledge products are valued within the service sector through the development of students and researchers as potential global human resources. So I thought that these were all really interesting. So I started trying to think of a virtual reality from this perspective. I don't know if I've taken you on that journey with me, but we'll see if we arrived here. And then this, I guess, is the commonly accepted definition of what internationalization is, and it's again, I'm interculturally competent adjacent. It's not necessarily my field, but I think that this was a great synopsis, and it's a seminal paper, where internationalization of higher education is the process of integrating an international, intercultural, and global dimension into the purpose, functions, teaching, research, and service, and delivery of higher education at the institutional and national levels. Okay, so I finally, I arrived. I said, okay, this is what they mean. This is what internationalization is supposed to be doing. So how can we do that? Who wants this? Everybody, okay? How do we implement this? Okay? And then other questions were, have I been internationalized? Did someone trick me into becoming international? What has happened? And am I internationalizing my students? The brief answer was absolutely yes. And there's been a lot of different ways that we get internationalized, and I'm not sure if I really thought about it. But what was it? Let me go back. Okay, so here's four really quick things. So I am in the military. I'm in the reserves, and that might make sense since I'm all excited about going to teach at the Defense Language Institute. That's like a marrying up of two things that have played an important role in my life. It was how I was able to get as far as I've gotten in education. So how did the military internationalize me? Well, it made me think about other people in good ways and probably bad ways too, right? What's one good way? When I was going through officer training 4 years ago, I got sent, 2 years ago, I got sent to this training where I was buddied with a captain from Colombia, from the Colombian army. He was a really cool guy. And I was like, why are they doing this? We're sharing all of our secrets with the enemy. He wasn't the enemy, he was an ally, right? And the idea was that we would have this foundation for being able to talk to each other, and that I would have someone I could talk to outside of our US armed forces that we could still relate with one another. At least I think that's what the idea was. They never told me. I didn't ask. I was too scared. Then other ways that it's happened was when I was a master's student. I took a course with Evelyn Gould and Natalie Hester at the University of Oregon, and they were teaching a class called The Idea of Europe. And all we did for that 12-week class was just criticize and critique and tear Europe apart and build it back up and then tear everything that we built up apart again. So I think that this was a really, it was kind of this interesting pathway and these thoughts that were going through my head about what is internationalization and how do we do it. So I kind of got to a better place about what internationalization was. I started to arrive there, and how do we implement it? If we're going to do it, we can do it from top-down or bottom-up methods, and I have to do it from the bottom-up method as an instructor. That's where I get to start. So, cultural immersion, right? That's what I'm going to do to bring my students to be more internationalized with me as an instructor is to use cultural immersion. What's the best cultural immersion we can come up with? Study abroad. I think it's generally accepted, right? That study abroad, everyone says, is one of the best ways to kind of inculcate that desire and motivation for our students to learn. So I was even risky. I don't even have a citation for that. I hope I'll accept that as a common knowledge. So one thing I wanted to point out is everyone's really excited, right? And they did this bubble. This is from UA Global. They did this bubble. Or I think of it as a bubble, but how are you going to finance study abroad? And this young lady right here, she must absolutely be thinking about how she's going to pay for study abroad. That must be what they were thinking when they did that. And I said, yeah, study abroad's really expensive. And I Googled it. And a quick Google said, okay, the average cost of study abroad, a quick Google, okay, is about 18 grand. And that was in 2017. I imagine it's gone up a little bit. But sure, or 36,000 for a full academic year. I don't have 18 grand lying around. I'm not sure where my students are going to come up with that. But sometimes, the universities do have, great ways to finance that. Grants, scholarships, FAFSA can be applied to that, which I didn't know. I found that out in that really cool study by DeWitt et al. From 2015. So I said, okay, well, if study abroad's the best way, but it's really expensive, then what's the next best thing? Okay, maybe tech. Maybe technology is the answer. Okay, we're almost there. You've suffered through my random thought process all the way up to here. But in DeWitt, around page 271, they say technology has substantial potential benefits for use in internationalization, such as building real-time, virtual cross-border classrooms, easing the flow and access of information and ideas across borders, widening global access to information in a near borderless environment, facilitating research collaboration. The challenge will be to find how technology best supplements rather than replaces other forms of cross-border learning and experience. Okay, I think I can do that. I think we can do that. This is, again, what's happening in my head, right? So why virtual reality? So VR has recently been regarded as a technology of huge potential in the language learning landscape, and I'll posit to you probably the lingua culture landscape as well. And that's from Sadler and Lloyd et al. And they're both starting to be some seminal voices in the VR landscape. So when you look at VR, we have to consider levels of immersion. Okay, what level of immersion am I aiming for when I am trying to get my students involved in this? What am I going to be able to use in the classroom? What am I going to be able to convince them to do at home on their own if maybe they have this? Which I have heard some students say they do have some version of VR at home, but it's rare. It happens, but it's rare. So levels of immersion. This is when academia referred to virtual reality for like the past 40 years, it was this. It was video games. It was World of Warcraft. It was the lo-fi Nintendo that I was playing as a 4-year-old. Okay, 10 minutes remaining. Okay, thank you. And then there's this, right? And this, maybe that speaks to me. Maybe one time I was training in a tank simulator and it looks kind of like this. This is a cockpit simulator, but they have tank simulators too. They're really fun. It's also scary. And then what we think of today, right? We see like Hot Pocket ads and there's guys running around wearing VR headsets, shooting each other, doing crazy stuff. So what's going to be the most easily accessible for all of our students? Probably something that they can just throw on their head and grab the controllers and get out there and start messing around. So you might recognize this name, Bhakti et al. 2019. We did a study. I'll just call her out. She's right there. And we were looking at low-cost, low-immersion VR methods, and that requires Google Cardboard, some 360 VR videos that either you create yourself or you go and you search for on the internet, and student smartphones, okay? So $15 a person, or like $25 per 2 students, because you can find bundles and cheap packs like that, okay? not super economical. I mean, if you have a classroom of 30, but at the same time, maybe you get 15, maybe you can find a grant for that. That may be more realistic finding a grant for that, because I'll go over the cost of the high-end VR towards the end, and then you'll probably say, oh yeah, that's better. While full immersion is oft considered the best means of language teaching, it's not always feasible in all circumstances. Using VR, we might be able to do things that were previously economically prohibitive. So, data from this study, kind of just glossing over it. If you want, this will be available and we can go over what we did. But a theme that constantly emerged in the reflections that the students did before and after the viewings of these VR videos that we showed them was they always expected to see a lot of people, and they had these expectations set of what they were going to see about the small town. And these VR experiences gave students the opportunity to explore authentic as well as different environments and reflect on their beliefs and stereotypes. So this was a really nice way to visually show them, hey, all Italians don't just yell at each other at dinner. That's not what they do. And they don't just walk around doing this all day long. But that was one thing that they were really excited about. They also noticed buses were made by Mercedes-Benz, and they couldn't quite get over that. They were like, why is that bus a Mercedes? It's really nice. So anyway, continuing on from here, we showed 3 videos of a street, a restaurant, and a town square. And these are some of the things that we noticed, and some of the surveys that they answered, and I wanted to point out that not everybody loved it. Not everybody was a fan. Some people really did like it, but you'll see I did not learn much about Italian culture. And let's see, 10, 25, so 45% said that they more or less agreed that they did not learn much about Italian culture using VR. So that's something you have to be aware of. How can you direct them to learn something about the Italian culture? We were trying in that study. We were giving it, our good old 110%. So, and then on the other hand, seeing videos in 360 degrees, question 4, and virtually experiencing Italian places increases my motivation to travel to Italy. And there, you only have 5% who disagreed in some way or another. So what you see is that VR is great for just getting people motivated. If you want to hype them up to go study abroad, VR is a good way to go. 95% said that, and from slightly agree to strongly agree, that it was a good route to go. So, lessons learned is blank, I hope. Okay, great. All right, so some things that we learned from that was VR can make people dizzy. Some people, not too many using Google Cardboard, complain of dizziness, but every once in a while. And you just say at that point, okay, take a break. Go get some air, because you don't want to be the teacher that made their student pass out. That's usually, you all know, probably a bad idea. Older smartphones don't always work with the newer apps, so that's something you have to try to look out for. Some students are resistant to using VR, that 46%, some of them just were like, no, I don't want to do it. Well, thank you for coming. We appreciate your participation. The door's right there. And then VR seems useful for challenging student stereotypes and preconceptions. So best practices, let's see, keep VR short, have a backup ready, and have people download apps ahead of time. If you have an app like Monzingo AR or YouTube VR or YouTube, just make sure that it's downloaded ahead of time. All right. And then I did my own study for VR for study abroad preparation. And this was with scholarship students who had everything paid for them. And I wish I had known about that scholarship when I was an undergrad. And they were from 3 different Southwestern universities. They were all coming together. They were getting ready to study abroad in Italy. And we showed the same videos, the street, the restaurant, and the piazza, the town square. And they basically had some really good insight, or at least when I asked questions, it seemed like good insight. And so using VR for travel abroad prep is useful. And again, you see a greater than 60% agreement with that. And then VR in the classroom is enjoyable and fun. And then again, you see a high percentage of students agreed in one way, shape, or form with that. So again, it's a good motivator. Doesn't mean it's awesome, but it's a good motivator. So it's a tool that you can use. And then here, I think VR enhances language learning. And again, I submit probably lingua culture or cultural learning as well. And then you've got another high percentage there. Only 30% did not necessarily agree. And then did using the VR tool help you to feel more prepared for studying abroad? And this was a point blank yes or no question that I asked them when they got back in 2018. 93% said yes, it did help them to feel prepared for study abroad. To save a little time, I won't go over all these, but in what way was it or wasn't it helpful? I had 8 negative and 22 positive remarks. And then one of the things that was great with this question was, now that you've returned, what aspects of the VR experience seemed more important, more memorable to you? Being able to take away the realism of the settings that I was, it's a typo, that I was after going to put myself in, or actually. I think it helped lessen the shock value of being in an entirely different country altogether to just see it through VR. And then subverting initial expectations. I did not give them that, they gave me that, and it was really nice to walk away with. So, lessons learned, same things as before. Some kind of interaction would be better. VR can help to lessen culture shock, is what I walked away from with that study. And then best practices, try to have interactive materials that may not have to do with VR, but you get them interacting with each other or to keep them engaged. And I did that backwards, thank you. So 2019, same thing, okay? Same study. They wanted different videos. The coordinator wanted things that were more specific. So I said, okay, let's check out a pharmacy, a town square, and a train station. And he was all for that. And the students seemed to really like it. In a nutshell, they came back and said the same thing. 93% said it was useful for them in helping to feel prepared for study abroad. And then I had 24 positive and 6 mixed or negative responses to was it or was, in what way was it or not? Was it not helpful for you with your experience in studying abroad? So, and then from these quotations, some more lessons learned. Use practical locations if possible, even from the city that they live in or that they're going to if you can. That, of course, that makes it more authentic as well, so then it's an experience that they can all relate to when they get there and when they come home. Okay, and then best practices. Let's see. Ask what is practical and think about what your learning outcomes are ahead of time. Sometimes because like Maggie and her co-researcher said in the other one, some of this is exploratory. And so we're kind of just firing questions out there in the dark. What can we do? What can we see that's going to help increase either student learning, student motivation, but we're still trying to figure out what those things are exactly. Approach those. So then, using high-end VR to enhance learning. I was looking specifically at vocabulary learning with this. I'm still analyzing this data. I was hoping to have a little bit more for you, but here's what I kind of walked away from with this. Skipping to maybe here. I felt my movement was very restricted. They were entangled in wires. And then the space that I had was maybe this big of a space to try to work with. And they're trying to spin around in a chair and they were hitting the wall and they were throwing things at me when they hit the wall. That's not true. And then maybe it would be helpful if when you initially pick up an item, it said the name of the item out loud. Plug for Maggie AR might be the way to go for that, or some combination of the two. Do you have any comments or thoughts you would like to add regarding your experience participating in this study? This came 3 weeks after they did the study, and they said it actually helped me. It's difficult to learn a language if no one is speaking and using it with you. It interacted with me in time, and it caused me to learn, not to mention I had a lot of fun. I wanted to play more. They were playing a game while they were trying to do the interactions. Fallout 4 has a PC game version and a VR version, so I could compare my results across those two things. So, lessons learned here. High-end VR requires lots of space. Using interactive environments can still feel restricted. Students were highly motivated to learn and play in the VR environment. control schemes are not intuitive in high-end VR. So the Google Cardboard, you put it up and you just like look around, right? Field of view changes based on what you're seeing. Just like a 360-degree video on your phone, you don't have to have the Google Cardboard, and you can still get a similar thing. With the high-end VR, it's much more expensive, and now they are developing the wireless headsets, because that has been a thing that even the developers noticed was kind of irritating for their consumers. So, best practices, plan extra time for training. I did that after my pilot study for the high-end VR. And then it may be good once a semester in a lab format until it becomes more portable and economical. So Google Cardboard, things with phones, things that they can use that are easily accessible. I would say that those are great go-to methods for integrating them into the curriculum, trying to use them. One time I used them in the classroom to show students a strike that was occurring. In Italy, someone was striking how 33 people got fired from a newspaper. And they were like, oh my gosh, these are real people with real lives who have real problems. Yes, right? That seemed like a win from the instructor standpoint. And then conclusions, VR is supplemental, not a strategy unto itself. It provides another useful tool in our tool belt, and student perspectives indicate that it can be quite powerful if we're leveraging it correctly in the classroom, if we can find what those methods are, because again, like I said, it's still being explored. And then it can be used to help prepare students for study abroad, and then help them to feel things in a more immersive situation, and they can see cultural intricacies that you can't necessarily replicate straight from a textbook. And that concludes my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. We have 2 minutes for questions.
Thank you so much. I'm thinking about the interactive part. So I guess you tried different activities, different lessons to tie to the use of virtual reality. So I wonder which ones you found more effective or more worth creating. And also if the students received any feedback on their reflections or whatever.
So we didn't get to give them any feedback in their reflections. When we were doing it, what was the most useful thing were the reflections that they did themselves, and then we tried to point out to them. We tried to ask guiding questions at that point. We were trying to put them down a particular path. Think about what you're hearing on the street. What are you seeing? What aren't you seeing? What aren't you hearing? And that seemed to be something that really kind of had an effect for the students. I don't necessarily have any totally. That does seem like it was the way to go. Yeah.
Thank you. So you mentioned that this was useful for helping students overcome stereotypes about the country. Do you think you could also consider using it to help overcome stereotypes about study abroad, such as the idea that it's automatic cultural immersion and a fun touristy experience? And how would you do that?
Absolutely. So in the Berti et al. Study and in my studies, we tried to use videos that weren't necessarily of highly touristic cities. So the first one was in this tiny town called Bergamo. And what students saw was that there just weren't thousands of people walking down the street to see the sights, because it was just a place where people lived. And so I think that is definitely one way, is by, if you go and you try to craft those videos and find places that will be less stereotypical, I think that's one key way to do that. Does that answer your question? Sort of.
Yeah, I mean, maybe thinking about contesting yourself, the idea that study abroad is automatically the best immersion, because actually the research on it shows a very different effect.
I think that would also be possible. I would definitely have to flip a lot of arguments and think about it in a different way, but I'd love to talk to you about that more later. Thanks.
Well, I'm really glad that you said that virtual reality is kind of another tool, because it's an actual photograph, but in 3D, right? So I was wondering about why, what were some other reasons apart from dizziness that students said that it was not good for them? Was it the pedagogy, the activities in class, Or what, did they mention anything else?
Some of them said that they felt like they would just learn better from the list. Like when I was looking at things for vocabulary learning, some of them just were like, no, I wasn't immersed. So that could actually be a defect of the technology, but I think also the pedagogy could have come into play there. So yes.
Thank you, Jacob, for
Thank
your
you.
presentation.